All right, welcome back. So, we're back to our NSX here inside of 3DSMAX. The last thing we need to do is set this up for render, and we're going to go through our render setup right now. So, one of the first things I want to do is I want to go into my render setup, and this is something that you guys would have to do when you're first coming into set up your render inside of Max. Now, one thing you'll notice is my render setup says render setup NVIDIA Mental Ray. Now, for one, I'm using 2013 of Max, and subsequently, NVIDIA has purchased the Mental Ray technology, so they actually own Mental Images now. So it's now an NVIDIA product. Now, to be able to set up your Mental Ray renderer, we need to be able to do some things. So here inside of Max, I want to go here to render setup. And if I wasn't already using the Mental Ray renderer, I'm going to show you how you can get to it. And you get to that by coming into render setup, going down to assign renderer, and then down here you'll see production, and then click on the little three dots next to production. It lets you, this is your choose render button. Now you can use the default scanline renderer, which Max probably will be set to by default. And then you also can use NVIDIA iRay, which is interactive. And then you can do the Quicksilver hardware renderer. Quicksilver is a new rendering engine from Autodesk. I haven't had too much experience with the Quicksilver hardware renderer yet. I will be putting out a video in the next month or so on how to set up this Quicksilver renderer and use it, as well as the NVIDIA iRay. But for right now, I'm just going to choose I'm just going to make sure I have Mental Ray. And I'll set this to default for a second and then come back in here, and then you can see that's where I would, if I were coming from the default settings, I could come in here and say NVIDIA Mental Ray and hit OK. Now, if you only want to be able to use the Mental Ray and already have it set up, one thing you can do is set Mental Ray and then come in here and say save as default. And then this will always be your renderer when you first open up Max, no matter what. So now that I have that set up, I'm going to close this down, and I'm going to hit M on the keyboard to open up my material editor. And if you're new to Max, you won't know that there's a change, but if you're an old user of Max, 2011 and farther back, you will realize that the material editor inside of 3D Studio Max has changed. The material editor in Max now looks a lot like Maya's Hypershade. The issue with this is that the slate material editor, it's really cool. It's really nice to be able to work in here in a node-based structure like you do inside of Maya. The only problem is that this to me still feel a little bit unpolished. Some people love the new Slate Material Editor, and as you can see, I have some nodes that are set up inside of the Slate Material Editor. But for the purposes of what we're about to do to set up our lights and our render environment, I want to switch this. So I'm going to go to Modes, and I'm going to switch this to the Compact Material Editor. So you can see I have my materials inside of here, and this is my Compact Material Editor. The thing that I find actually very odd is that the Compact Material Editor and the Slate Material Editor, even though they're in the same program, they can both have the materials from either one used in the scene. It seems as though both of those editors are independent of each other. Because if you look right now, I don't see any of the materials that I created in the Slate Material Editor inside of my simple Material Editor node. But that's okay. Now the first thing we want to do is we want to actually get the image we're going to use as our background to render this onto. So I'm going to come here and click on this texture, or this shader rather, and with this shader selected, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say get material. And when I do get material, I want to look in this list. I'm going to close down the materials. I don't want a material, I want a map. And I want standard maps, and I want a bitmap. Now, what I'm about to load up is, if you can see, Photoshop files recognize this as HDR images. And usually these are called HDRI images. HDRI images are high dynamic range imagery. These images are basically images that were shot with a really high megapixel camera, and now I can actually use that image as a lighting environment. And what you'll notice right now, this is a studio environment. And I know it's a studio environment, one, because it tells me that, but two, because I can look at this and see that this actually has a cyc wall in my environment. So when you look at these two walls in here, these are the two walls at the end of the studio. And the reason why we call these cyc walls is that at the corner, usually in a regular room, you would have corners at the very bottom, of course. But inside of a cyc studio, the bottom wall has this curved structure to it. So it has this like curved structure, which realistically makes the wall look like it never ends because there's no shadow from the corner on the floor to the wall. So it looks like this is a never-ending white environment when you're inside of one of these studios. It's really kind of weird and kind of trippy when you're in the studio. But when you shoot against the cyc wall, it looks as though the white behind it just goes on forever, which is actually which is really great for our purposes. So we can see I have my actual map in here, and I'm going to change the name of this. I'm going to change this to Studio Lights, just so I can see something that's a little bit more descriptive than map 24. And one thing I want to do with this is a texture. So if I look at my coordinate space, this is a texture, but it really is an environment. So I'm going to click on environment, and I'm going to set environment to spherical environment. And what you'll notice that happens is that my environment kind of unwraps. So if you look at this, if I put this to like screen, it shows it with the picture. But if you kind of look at the image, that something looks like, it looks really weird. Right now, this image is still set up because it was taken with a light probe, which are circular, so that they can do a 360-degree turn of the entire room. So with one image, you're capturing the entire room all the way around you. So what you really have is a spherical environment. And if I change this environment and then change this to spherical, you'll see it unwraps my environment. So now this environment is ready to use inside of Max as a background to light my scene. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to bring this in and start setting up some stuff. So there's some pieces I'm going to have to set up. So follow along. It's going to get a little bit weird, but I'm going to go through what these pieces are. Now, just know that you can only use this setup with Mental Ray. So when you're rendering this out, you can only render the way that I'm showing you. You can only render this out with Mental Ray. So make sure your Mental Ray renderer is what's currently loaded. So I'm going to click on this shader right here, and once again I'm going to hit Get Material, and then my window's already open, and I'm going to look down in here, and what I'm going to look for, I'm going to close down Standard, and I'm still in the map section, but now I'm in the Mental Ray section of my maps, and I'm going to come in here, and I want an environment probe chrome ball. I want to click on this guy, and I want a environment background camera map. And I'm going to click on this guy, and I want an environment background switcher. So let's talk about what we're doing with this. This very first one is the environment sphere. So what this is going to do is when I render this, it's going to actually make a sphere and wrap it around my entire environment. So what I want to do to connect this up, I'm going to change this, and I'm going to change the name of this to Chrome Enviro, just so I can keep stuff together. And then I'm going to change this to Camera. Can't spell this morning. Camera map, and then I'm going to change this to switcher. Alright, so I've got these guys set up. So what I want to do is I've got my environment ball and I have my bitmap or my environment in here. If you look at this, I have where I can browse and go find a map to put into this, or I can use the little map node slot right here. So I'm going to grab my map, click, hold, and drag my map right to this little square. It won't go to the browse, but it will go to the map square. And when I drop it, it's going to ask me, do I want to make a copy or an instance? I'm going to tell you, you want to make an instance because when you make changes to this original bitmap in here, it'll change. If you do it as an instance, it'll change in here. So if you were to make changes to, the tiling or the offset or anything inside of this map currently right here, then it would automatically update inside of this, which is what we want. Now, the next one I have in here is my camera map. So I'm going to grab this and drag this to my camera map, and what it's going to do is it's going to actually, I'm going to choose instance once again, it's going to actually map this image to my camera, so it'll be projected through my camera. Now, the last one I want to go to in here is my switcher. And what I want to do is I want to take the environment, the Chrome environment ball, and drag that to my environment for environment and reflections. I'm going to drop that there, make that an instance. And then I can either use my camera map for the background, so I could come in here and do this and drop this on my background layer. Now you'll see they look really weird because they all look exactly the same, but they're all doing different things inside of your world, right? Now, the last thing I need to do, I'm going to close this down, but one of the last things I need to do is I need to hit the number 8. So I'm going to hit the 8 key on my keyboard. When I hit 8, it opens up my environment and effects menu. And inside of here, you'll see it has environment map. And what I want to do, once again, is grab this bitmap and drag it over here to environment map. And I'm going to say instance. Now, when I do that, what you'll notice is in the background of Max, you'll see my background inside of Max is now my studio environment. So if you look at this, we can see as I start rotating around, that's my studio. So I can see my actual image in the background. So what I want to do is, let's get this framed up. So inside of this gigantic infinite space, I'm just going to turn my camera, get myself a pretty nice little view of my car. I'm going to set it up maybe like this, get something really close in. One thing that's really nice about this too is that once you have your shot kind of framed up the way you want to, so you can frame this up. When you have it framed up how you want to, what you want to do is you want to set up a camera for this. And setting up a camera inside of Max is pretty easy. Once you have your perspective view where you want it, all you have to do is hit Control and hit C on the keyboard. When you hit Control C, as you can look right now, it shows me camera 001. So I now have a camera, and if I come over here where my normal perspective camera would be at, if I right click, you can see I have cameras. I have camera 001. I can go back to perspective. I can move my perspective view around. So right now I'll just move my perspective. And you'll see I can move my perspective view around and look at this. And you can see my camera sitting in here. So basically what's happened is I have locked that view that I wanted. And I'm able to keep that, which is really great. Now, one last thing. Inside of this, I'm going to look inside of my layer editor, and I'm going to go to where I have my cyc wall, and it's just a material that's this is just a plane that I put onto the floor. So it's just like a single plane. I'm going to scale this out some more, because this is how I'm going to capture my shadows. Because I don't want this to show up in my environment, but I do want the shadows from my car to seem like it is grounded onto something. So I'm going to set up this to be my shadow background to capture my shadows in my scene, in my 3D scene that I can composite with my real life studio environment scene. So to do that, once again, back inside of my material editor. So I'll show you what I did, and that's why it wasn't showing up. It wasn't inside of my maps. It's actually a shader. So I'm going to go to where it says Arc and Design, click on Arc and Design, And then inside of mental ray, you'll see there's a shader for matte shadow reflection. I'm going to click on that shader. Now, for this shader for the camera map background, once again, I'm going to come in here and get my camera map and drag that to my camera map background and say instance. So now that's my third, or my final connection, which this is my shadow map, and I'm going to change the name of this. I'm going to say shadow map. And I want to make a copy of this window so we can see the results of the render. So I'm going to clone this. So I'm going to say clone rendered window, and I have a clone of it. I'm going to move this off for a second. And what I want to do is I'm going to close this, and you can still see that I'm going to go back to perspective just so we can see our piece. So I have that piece of geometry sitting right there, which is just this plane. I'm going to grab this shadow map and drag it onto that particular plane. So now I have something to capture shadow with. And I'm going to go back to my camera. Now when you come out of your camera view, if you just hit the C key, not Control C, but just C, it'll go back to your to your camera. And I'm going to come in here and go into my render setup. And let's look at indirect illumination, because that's what we're using to actually light this scene as well. And I'm going to look in the Final Gather section. And right now for Final Gather, you'll see you want to make sure that you enable Final Gather. And I'm going to turn up my precision of Final Gather to low. Final Gather, what it basically does is it uses the camera and it shoots out light rays from the camera into your objects in the scene, in your scene, and then it bounces those rays back into the camera. So it kind of like it uses the camera as a light source to fire photons from or fire rays from, and then bounce those back. Now, the higher quality you turn this up, the better precision you're going to have on the bounces of your light rays. But you also start to sacrifice render time. So you have to be very delicate with it. So I'm not going to pump this up because it would take a while for this to render out. And in some cases, it can take hours for a piece to render out if you have a very complex scene set up. So now that I have this set up, I'm going to hit render once again, and we're going to render this out. Let's get this guy to come in here. Now we can start to see inside of my very, very white environment that I'm starting to get a little bit of bounce off the floor down here. I'm picking up, like you can see the white environment actually picking up some of the green from the car. Now what you'll notice is I still don't have shadows falling on this. What I want to do, the last thing, is I'm just going to make a simple light to be able to bounce or cast a shadow inside of my environment. So I'm going to come here to my Common tab, and I'm going to come in here, not go to geometry, I'm going to go to lights, and let's go back into my top view just so I can see this. So inside my top view, I want to have my light coming from this side over to this side. I'm just going to make inside of this, I'm going to go and get myself a standard light, and I'm going to get a MR area Omni, which is my mental ray area Omni light. Or I can get a mental ray area spotlight, or if I look inside of photometric lights are set up to be like realistic lights. I can also use the mental ray sky portal. But right now I'm just going to set up just a simple light just so we can have this in there. Let's go into perspective and look at this guy. And pull this up. Pull it over here. Now if I want to, I can change my shading from my viewport to realistic, and it will try to show me my shadows from my lights. I'm going to come in here to my modify panel, look at this light, and make sure shadows are on. That's good, shadows are on, and you could change this to a directional light. Directional lights will actually look like that. They'll actually have this like big huge direction over them. The bigger you scale your light, also the larger the area that it'll affect. So I could take this and bring like this big, really huge directional light over this guy. So I'm gonna get this here. Let's pull this back. Kind of pull this up. Pull it back some more. And pull it up. So I've got this big, huge light that I'm kind of like blasting onto the surface. So I'll go back to my camera. I'll hit C and go back to my camera, and let's render this. Let's check out what our render looks like. I've got one light in my scene. So you can now see that I have my light in here, and you'll see it says one light, and you can see that the environment, the light is actually falling on my environment, and it's making my shadows show up in here. I still have my nice reflections from my HDR images, and you can see I've got this really big bright light over here, and it's kind of making this a little dark over here. So I'm gonna set this up just like I would a real life setup. I'm gonna get one more light, and let's go get my other light. And what I'm gonna get right now, I'm gonna get a photometric light, and I'm just gonna get this to be a MR Sky Portal. And grab this, and I go to my top view so I can line this up, because I don't want one side of my car to be like super dark and one side to be super bright. So let's get this, and let's turn this guy. Let's go to perspective so we can see what we have going on here. We'll grab this, move it up, move it out, turn it towards the car, and go back to my camera view. And once again, I'll go to my modify panel. The one thing I don't need for this light, I do not need shadows, because I already have shadows. I already have shadows in my other. I don't want two shadows bouncing inside of here. So, and then multiplier, I'm going to turn this down to like 0.5, so half power. And then I'm going to render this again. And you now should see when it starts translating my scene and starts rendering, I now have two lights in my scene. I'm getting this to calculate. What's really cool about this is you can actually see my studio environment in the background, in my reflections on my car, which is actually really cool. Um, and all these pieces render out and give me a really nice render. Now, one thing I might do, I might get rid of my direct light that's over there, because it looks like it's a little harsh on this side. And then I might bring up the power of this. Let's bring it back to 1 and just see what we're going to get when we render at 1. We just want to make sure that we're not making our scene too blown out. We don't want to make our model look too blown out with this piece. And it could be that the direct light we have on the other side is actually just too powerful. And I think that's what's happening. I think our light on the other side is just way too powerful. So what I want to do is I'm going to go back in here to perspective, come over here, and find my direct light. And these guys are on frozen layers. So let's see what layer they're on. They're on this lens layer right here. So I'm going to grab this guy, and I'm just going to delete him. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of this little guy. So let's grab him. And just like everything else, I'm going to hold shift and drag this off. And I'm going to make an instance of this. So these have the same value, sort of. So one of these will be used for here, and I'm going to turn both of these to like 0.5, so now they're half their power. And I'm going to hold shift and drag down one more. I'm going to make a copy of this one. The reason why I'm making a copy of this third one is so that I can actually set shadows to this one. This one will be different, and I'm going to set this a little bit higher. This is going to be kind of like my key light, or my hottest light inside of my scene. Let's go back in here. So see, and then let's render this. I've got 3 lights inside of my scene right now. And let's see what this looks like for us inside of Max. And we can see it's working. I need to still go in here and do a little bit more tweaks with my lights. It's a little dark on the top part of my car, but you can see that I'm getting a really nice render. You can see I can actually see these shadows from the tires making contact with the background shader. And all I have to do is really just kind of crank up my light a little bit. I'm going to crank this up to maybe 2.5. Just crank up my light a little bit and get some more light inside of my scene. I probably need a more direct light. The sky portals act almost like sunlight does, which is a little harsh at times. And I think that those are kind of killing me off a little bit. But you can see that I'm actually able to render out my piece, keep my lighting information, and do it really well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a final shot for this, and with this final shot, I'll show you what my final render is, and I'll change my lights out and get this final render set up, and I'll be back in just a second. Okay, so if you can see, we've done our final render on this, and I'll actually walk you through what my final pieces were inside of Max. So what I've done is, in the end, I just chose two different lights, and these are both photometric lights. And one of these photometric lights has ray trace shadows turned on, and then for my this has ray trace shadows on, and then for intensity, this is set to condensance. So it's set to 1500 for my condensance. And the other thing that you'll notice inside of this is that they have a shape to them. So this is condensance of 1500, and then this light over here is not it's a copy of it, but it's not an instance. So I copied this light, and then this is set to 50. So I'm given like a nice fill light. This is my key light. My key light's my hottest, is my brightest and hottest light in my scene, and then I have a nice fill light to fill out my scene. So if I look at my render frame, this is what we have for our final render, and this was our first render. So you can see the dramatic difference with having our lighting set up inside of here. This is our scene with no lights inside of it. There's no lights at all in this view. And then this view over here actually has our lighting information in here with this. Now I could go back in here and adjust, some of my lights because I'm getting this really hot glare on the windshield right here that I could change. I could just move my light to a different area and still have the highlights and do that. But you'll notice most of the reflections are handled by the actual studio environment. And you can see I'm capturing the shadow underneath it. So I have my shadow so I can see it's grounded to the ground. Um, and in here there was no shadow because there was no light to cast a shadow. And those are both pieces composited together. And that is my final render. To be able to save this, it's pretty simple. I have this rendered out. Inside of my render view, I'm going to click on Save Image, and I can just save this to my desktop. So let's go in here and save this to my desktop. And I'll say Beauty Shot, and change the format for this to JPEG so I can have something to save it out as. So this is a JPEG, save it as my best quality, and hit OK. So now I have an actual rendered view of my car. Everything looks great, and that is what we needed to do to set this thing up. Let's do a quick recap of what we did. We actually brought in an HDR image for our background. We set up a environment chrome ball. We set up a camera map, also set up a switcher, and then finally we set up a shadow reflection map. And all I did was I applied this material to the chrome environment ball. I applied that same material to my camera map, and then I actually applied my camera map to my background inside of my switcher, and I used my chrome ball inside of the environment reflection slot. And then on my shadow map, I used my camera map slot inside of my camera map background for my shadow map. And I know it's a little bit confusing. Go through it a couple times, it'll become second nature to you. You'll notice that it's showing me which lights or well, which textures are used in my scene. Anything with the little dog ears on the corners of it is actually being used in the scene. The your switcher and your environment ball, they will not show up as being used in the scene, but they are used inside of other shaders that are used inside of your scene. And Mental Ray still uses it without having to have this connected to anything. And then the last thing I had to do was I hit 8 on my keyboard, and then I can see my environment map. And the only thing I did was I took this, once again, my handy dandy studio lights, and dropped it on here. Now, the advantage of doing all of this and using this one bitmap as a connection for everything else is if I wanted to come in here and change this and say, you know what, I'm going to go bitmap and I want to change this. I want to just go back and I'm just going to go back into and say, I'm going to use my studio yellow. And I just go in here and use a whole new HDR image. Give it a second. So now you can see this environment is yellow. I'm going to hit OK. And what you'll notice is you see how all of my pieces just automatically change for me. So now if I go inside of this and render, I will get a yellow environment. So that's the cool thing about using that one map to be the main map for all of your other map connections. Because if you just change that one guy, it'll change all of your HDR images and all of your setup network in one fell swoop. So I can switch out that particular file and be able to render this in any environment that I want to without having to go back and reconnect all those nodes all over again. So that's what makes that so simple and makes that such a valuable thing when you're working on it like that. And you can see now I have this yellow studio environment. So I hope that this taught you how to get your renders working inside of 3D Studio Max. And I hope to see you in our next video series, which will be all about organic modeling. So I'll go through a lot of techniques for organic modeling right inside of 3D Studio Max. So until next time, happy modeling.